This is Tim.
I'm Lily.
And this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim with Mulele in Tokyo on Skype. How you doing?
I'm good. And you?
Okay. Yeah, actually, since the last time we recorded, we had a kind of day on the town with Brandon. You know, the three of us were the founding hosts of Deconstructing Comics before Critiquing Comics even existed. So he was on his way moving from Okinawa to California. So he stopped through Tokyo and was seeing as many people as he could here. So we hung out with him quite a while. But yeah, actually, I think what's interesting is that Critiquing Comics, I think, is kind of doing what we originally were thinking or kind of hoping Deconstructing Comics would become. Where people send in their comics and we discuss them.
To be honest, it was so long ago, I don't remember the actual intent of Deconstructing Comics, the original intent, other than a bit of self-promotion.
Yeah.
But,
right. Well, I remember you selling me on it by saying that it would be a way to promote Spider-Hag, my webcomic. And instead it just became another thing to promote.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, these things don't tend to promote themselves. Although, word of mouth is supposedly the best way to that podcasts grow. So we need a little bit more of that. But anyway. So we got another couple of comics to talk about. The first one is from Victor Edison, who's here in Japan. When I used to go to Kaigai Manga Festa or CAT, I think he was at CAT also, and when I walked around with my recorder and talked to people, he was generally there, and I talked to him a few minutes. So you probably heard him on the podcast on Deconstructing Comics at some point before. I think one time I did do a talk with him on Skype also, but it's been years ago. Anyway, so when he sent us this comic called the Shika-Machi Journals, part of his email says, I've stopped doing the journal comics. He was doing his journal comics for years and years and was always running a year or two behind the current day. And instead decided to focus on telling stories about the town where I live. It has history all the way back to the Stone Age. One of the shrines here is for a god involved in the Japanese creation myth, so I decided to start with some of those stories. So this is Shika-Machi Journals, Book 1, Before Time.
So he's going to do several of these and collect them into a book.
Or maybe several books. He actually told me that what he sent us is being printed.
Okay.
And he's planning to sell it at Comitia.
Okay.
And also the first couple bits of it are on Webtoon. So I'll link to that so people can see at least part of it. I imagine he's going to be putting up more on Webtoon also. So yeah, the part that we're seeing consists of Japanese creation myths, which I knew a little bit about. I knew about Izanagi and Izanami. Dropping a spear in the ocean and the water dripping from it forms Japan.
Well, not exactly a drop in the ocean, more like a light poke. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean the water drops coming off of it.
Yeah. I don't know. It's kind of weirdly sexual.
Right. Yes. I think that's intentional.
Okay.
Well, many years ago when I was in college, I did a directed study about Shinto, the native Japanese religion, and this was one of the things that was in my paper. And I think one of the sources I was reading did mention, oh, by the way, this is pretty sexual. So, yeah. Yeah, a long thing, dripping stuff off of it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, and that part of it, and this is all in black and white. It's pretty clear art style, mostly. And I was, pretty familiar with that part of it already. So I didn't have any problem with that. A little later, I found some things that were a little puzzling to me that need a little bit more explanation because I wasn't so familiar with those parts of the story.
I see.
A little later, Izanami doesn't want Izanagi to look at her disfigured face.
Right.
And then he does look, and she sends some guys chasing after him.
Yeah.
But I wasn't sure who they were. I recognized the guy who was like the thunder guy with the drums, in a circle around him. But I can never remember his name, and I didn't know who the other guy was. So, I just felt like, a lot of readers, in English are not going to know this stuff. So I thought it needed a little more explanation there. And also later, there's a talking sword. And I didn't know where that came from. And there's a scene that I think is supposed to be the prototype for sumo. Yeah. And I think, in the literature elsewhere, it says that, but you just had to kind of get that from the pictures here. I thought it needed a little more explanation of what it was showing. And what did you think of it?
Well, it kind of depends on who your audience is.
Yeah,
He's written this in both English and Japanese. So I'm feeling that the Japanese viewer would not be quite as in the dark about some of these things. Yeah. But for English readers, or for the uninitiated, I guess, there is a little bit of a reach here. But the thing that I found was the artwork was beautiful, and it has a dynamicism that the daily comics didn't have. There is something reaching towards fantastical here, which I quite enjoyed. But there is I don't know what you call it, kind of a leftover ism from the daily comics, I felt, is the tendency to gloss over the minutia of the day to get it down to one small segment just so you can kind of contain it. And he does a lot of that here. There's a lot of reduction. Whereas I think this story would have benefited from a lot more exploration of each scene.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to say too.
Yeah. So not so much in the sense of just trying to explain the difficult parts of this myth, but more in the sense of, for example, and maybe this is my own thing of it, my own sense of it. There is no extrapolation story-wise in that he doesn't look at, they're all gods, but just for the sake of this, I'm going to call them men and women. The man loves his wife very much. The wife dies, and then he travels to the underworld, basically goes to hell to kind of bring her back. And she's like, nah, we're done, son. And he wants to look at her one last time because he does love her. So he looks back, and she's ugly, and she's so vain that she sends some thugs after him. What, to beat his ass, to kill him, to what? I don't know, but basically chase him away. And then curses him once he's out of the underworld and says, I will kill 1,000 of your people. And so he's now got to make 1,500 just to keep up. But I think it was like per day she was going to do that. And so he's got to generate 1,500 per day. That's a lot of fucking. But so the dynamic between these two people is kind of weird by my sense. Why was she so vengeful? And maybe it's explained a little bit more deeply in the myth itself, but here it's not explored. It just is what it is. Mm-hmm. And so, especially with this kind of story, take the time, put in the extra pages, extrapolate from what you know as the author versus what the creation myth is, or what's written about it. So I kind of felt that there was not enough exploration, not enough of Victor's own sense of what this is, other than just how he put it on the page. He didn't add to the story. And so in that sense, I feel there's a little bit of a missed opportunity here. I think this story needed to be longer, much longer, mm-hmm. and really needed to be Victor's take on this myth.
Yeah.
More than a straight telling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it would be good for the author to be reflected in, I mean, the artist, I should say, the teller, yes, to be better reflected in it. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, because this myth by itself does leave me with a few questions. And I don't know necessarily that it's from ignorance of the myth itself, but more just in the cultural difference, or the difference in the time when this myth was created versus now. Mm-hmm. Sensibilities are different.
Yeah.
I mean, is this some sort of divorce metaphor? pre divorce concept? I don't know, but it seems to be a little bit unreasonable.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why that part of the story is there. So yeah, it would have been nice to have more kind of, what is this part of the story trying to tell us? Beyond Japan was created by these guys.
If we were to actually look at this not as a telling of a creation myth, but as just a straight story, we would want a little bit of foreshadowing of the vengeful wife's nature before her death. That there was already trouble between them. He loved her, but she was kind of like, this man's a little tired. I'm getting sick of this. But then when she dies, she's definitely sick of it. Or something like that. We would want something to explain a little bit more some of the choices here and there. And also, we never got to see who he was making all these kids with later. Because when he's like, no, I will not get out of Japan. My two sons will decide, as I will retire. And where do these two sons come from? And actually, he should have about 1,500 sons for every day that he existed. So, anyway.
Okay. I have to bring the English major here. There were a few misspellings. A couple things in particular I wanted to point out. Somehow on page 27, a couple of names, two, not just once but twice, we got two different names where a couple of letters got transposed. Izanagi became Izangai, and Amaterasu became Amateraus. So,
I think all of these things are open to interpretation, and perhaps it is more a kind of reimagining page to page of. Sorry, I'm just bullshitting.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess it's a typo.
The other thing was, when he says he's going to, have a lot of children, he says, if you kill 1,000 of my people, I will bear 1,500. Now, there are two problems there. One, a woman bears a child. Bear means carry.
Yeah.
But also, bear should be B-E-A-R. Mm-hmm. And he's written B-A-R-E here, meaning, like naked. I will naked 1,000 children. So, yeah, it's a word, but it's just a different word.
Okay.
So, I suppose what he should have said would be like, I will bring
father
forth. Yeah, I will father. Yeah, that's a good one. I will father 1,500. Yeah, father as a verb.
Yeah, I will fuck like there's no tomorrow.
That too.
Yeah. Although if the one thing, hearing your intro, that there are more stories like this, and if there are more stories to be included in some sort of like 200-page book or something, and this is just the kickoff, then I can see this being a short bit. It does kind of fit in that sense of a kind of an appetizer to the main work.
Mm-hmm.
And as an appetizer, it should be a little taste of something, not complete by itself, and not entirely satisfying, but interesting and a good start. And so at this point, not including the misspellings, it is that. It is that for me, even with the other misgivings that I have about some of the explanation. But this alone, as a kind of standalone, this is all you get, and not touching creation myths or anything else about the history of Japan or my town, then this is not quite enough. So just in that sense, if it's collected, I think it will work a lot better with other stories to follow.
Right. Well, yeah, as a story about his town, I saw from the email sort of his reasoning for including Japanese creation myth in his story of his town, but it wasn't really what I expected from a story of his town. I was... I don't know. I guess he does say his town goes back to the Stone Age, but I wasn't really expecting mythology, I guess. It seems more like a story of Japan to me than a story of his town.
Well, as they say in the Japanese national anthem, as small pebbles gather to create larger stones, this story is the first small pebble.
Okay.
Well, I read that in the Japanese national anthem. I was like, what? But apparently back in the day, when the original poem that the anthem is based on was written, the belief was that small pebbles gathered to become larger stones.
Mm.
And that's just wild to me. But yeah,
they grow.
Oh no, they congregate and then they join. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Our patron-only Spider-Man 1963 podcast is officially over, but that doesn't mean we can't keep talking about the series. Now on Patreon, part 1 of a 2-part discussion of Amazing Spider-Man 13, the first appearance of Mysterio. I'm joined by New Yorker and Mad Magazine cartoonist Joe Dater, recent recipient of a Reuben Award, to go through this classic issue. Here's a sample of our discussion. The fourth panel is really striking, where he's lying in bed at night worrying, and there's a shadow that's cast right across his eyes.
Yeah, it's great. That's great. It looks like it's like the part of the window frame, or maybe it's a lamp or something. But whatever is the case, it's casting a shadow over his eyes, but you can still see his open eyes shining through. So you really see he's lying awake at night.
Mm-hmm. And I think it kind of suggests, his worry that he's got something sinister going on that he doesn't remember.
Yeah.
Signifying what he's worried about. And then he wakes up the next day to a radio announcement that Spider-Man struck again during the night. So now he's really convinced that he's doing it behind his own back.
He thinks it's him, but he's still in his pajamas. Nothing's changed in his room. There's a lot of evidence that he could look at if he was not immensely stupid and say, obviously something is amiss, and it's not me doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to solve this.
Part 2 comes out this Saturday, and you can hear this and all our Spider-Man discussions, along with Tim Catches Up with the MCU and more, by supporting this podcast for the paltry sum of $4 a month. Check out all our support tiers and goals at patreon.com/deconcomics. We thank you for your support. Now back to the show. Okay, our second comic is called GarageBand. No, it's not the Apple software that I use to produce my podcasts. It's a webcomic written by Jason D. and art by Celia Tian, Tian. It's at garagebandcomic.com, so people can look at it there. So what we have here, so there was a 19-page story, kind of episode of GarageBand called Video Daze, D-A-Z-E, that came out in 2017, and then there was nothing in 2018, and this past April 29th, a new story started called I Hate Harmony Korine.
The director.
Is that who that is? I don't know.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. And that story is ongoing as we review this, so that story's not finished. The characters are all anthropomorphized animals who are teenagers, and they're getting in a lot of trouble using drugs and crashing dad's car and so forth. And the art style is clearly manga influenced. It's pretty easy to follow, I thought. I wasn't saying, what's this that I'm looking at? Maybe a little rough in places, but pretty good looking. The story, I don't know. I mean, these characters are, I don't know. I feel like they're not very nice people. So it's a little tough to identify with them. But I liked some of the stuff that he did with it. In particular, in the first story, Video Days, on the third page, where in that last row of panels, the artist is female. I should say she focuses just on the character's shoes. And I thought the shoes really told you something about the characters, where the guy who the other two are looking on as kind of wimpy, he's got one shoe untied, and rather than a Nike stripe on his shoe, it's this kind of wavy line, where the others have nicer looking shoes. You see the one in particular who has a big Nike swoosh on it and some kind of like webbing like design on it. So yeah, I kind of liked that. That was actually one of my favorite parts of the comic overall. What do you think of it?
Before I get into that, I wanted to ask, was there some sort of letter or comment that came with this?
No, this was just, it was in a newsletter that comes into my email from Vivid Publishing. That's called the Dreamkeepers newsletter. And it has, various stuff that Vivid Publishing is putting out in it. I guess it means that they're, I don't know, are they going to be publishing a book of GarageBand? I'm not sure why that's in there, but...
I don't know Vivid Publishing. What else do they put out?
Um, I'm trying to remember. This has been kind of coming in for a while. I feel like one of the main people at Vivid might have done a comic that we critiqued long ago, but it's kind of faded in my memory now, like many other things.
Right. Okay. Yeah, the artwork is quite beautiful. And yeah, I like the eye of the artist as well. The focusing on the shoes bit is kind of a good reflection of that aesthetic. The story, yeah, the characters are not likable, and I found myself more often than not wondering why these people, why these characters are together. None of them really seem to like each other. They don't seem to be anything but toxic to each other. And as a reader, I saw no point to either the stories or reading them. And I'm sorry to be so harsh, but it's only because the dialogue, the writer can write. The writer is clearly going for something. But to me, we've got cringy characters doing cringy things and are basically mean-spirited to each other for no good reason. There's no reprieve from the constant I don't know what to call it. I'm losing my words here.
Acrimony.
Yeah, and there's no point to all of it. There's no point where a character suddenly gives and you get a moment of truth. The characters seem to be unaware of how terrible they are, or at least are not willing to let anybody see that awareness. And so I look at this as kind of pointless. And yeah, I really did not like it.
Yeah, I think I had to, find other reasons to keep going, like the storytelling and the art or something, because yeah, I didn't like the characters.
Yeah.
There was one place in Video Days that I didn't understand what was happening. I'm wondering if you caught it, or is it my deficiency or the artist? Page 17, where the kind of wimpy guy is taking off on a skateboard in the half pipe, and seems to be getting a good start, and then someone off panel yells, "My tech deck."
Yeah.
And there's a swoosh that's either coming onto the half pipe or going off of it.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand what happened there. Next, we have the two other people who were watching, and we don't know what they're seeing. The guy who's skateboarding is saying, "Ah!" And then he ends up with the skateboard up his butt, which is kind of a goofy gag. But I didn't understand what was happening. That my tech deck, what does that mean? What was swooshing on or off of the half pipe?
It was swooshing on, and a tech deck is a mini skateboard that you play with your fingers. 2 pages earlier, one of the other characters was playing with it nearby. But it's like 2 pages ago. It was like it's not even recognizable as a setup, really. But then we have the punchline 2 pages later. That's a little late. I mean, 2 panels I could understand, but keep it on the same page. I think this didn't work for exactly you.
Yeah, okay.
It's too far apart.
I found it. That guy with who's a bird apparently.
Yeah.
who's saying Tony Hawk's Pro Tech Decker 4. I had no idea what that meant. I
Yeah.
see the little tiny skateboard on a railing there that says grind, but I didn't know what that was. So
Yeah.
I was just lost.
Yeah. There are a couple of spots in here where the setup and payoff don't quite work, or it jumps a little bit too much. That bit with the one girl throwing up, I found that to be kind of disjointed, not well explained as well. But I do kind of get just as is that a girl or a guy? I'm not sure. I think it's maybe a girl.
One girl and two guys, yeah.
So which one is the girl? Is the girl the one learning to skateboard?
In the first story, I took the blonde to be the girl.
Okay, so the guy on the skateboard who crashes. I do like the page 17, where he's just riding down the ramp and it looks like he's getting the hang of it. And just at that moment, this tiny skateboard flips in and crashes.
Also, yeah, I didn't understand why the story was called Video Days, because I didn't see any video in it.
Oh no.
And also, I take it the story is supposed to be, or the comic is supposed to be about these guys having a band, which is not mentioned at all in Video Days. And in the other story, it seems like they are supposed to be going to play a show, but so far we haven't actually seen them being a band.
Yeah.
It must be a awfully acrimonious band. I wouldn't want to be at one of their rehearsals.
I mean, I'm looking at page 19 of Video Days now, and that's a beautiful page. The sky is great. The skateboard up the butt is a little bit weird, but, whatever. But to me, the art is really, really good. The story, I don't know. There's no story here. And the dialogue and vapid characters, I could give a shit. And so, yeah, I find it more frustrating than anything else. Because it's not like the writer can't write. The writer has skills, but chooses to do this. And so I'm just like, no. It's like you're talking to someone on the street and you're following along with what they're saying. And then at a certain point, it's like, that's bullshit. And you feel like you've wasted your time listening to this person put down whatever he's putting down. And yeah, I have the same feeling about this comic. But anyway, that's about it, really.
Okay.
I love the art, but the story, no. This reminds me a little bit, although a little more, a little better artistically than that one comic. It was years ago. They did this really shit 4-panel comic with a copy paste thing, and then the next comic they produced, the same writer produced, I think with a different artist, was Holy Fuck.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I can't remember the name of the older strip right now. But...
Yeah, the older strip, it's giving me the same vibe. I hated that one. I hate this one. They're pretty much on the same level of hate. But the artwork here is so much more than that strip. But, yeah, there's just a whole lot of why.
Well, maybe the next one will be awesome in that same tradition.
Yeah. Well, when the creators of this book move on to something else, hopefully we get a look at that, and maybe it's better.
Yeah.
By the way, Harmony Korine directed Kids, Gummo, and Spring Breakers. I guess are the most popular ones.
So far we have no idea what what her relevance to this story is either.
His
guy named Harmony.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just took that to be a woman's name, but okay.
Well, he's sporting a beard in this picture, so I'm guessing.
Yeah, most likely.
Yeah.
There have been women who could grow beards, at least in circuses, but...
Yeah.
When you watched Batman as a kid, you enjoyed the colorful heroes and villains, the text sound effects on the screen, the thrill of watching a heroic crime fighter escaping from death traps and taking down bad guys. But the show was devised to interest adults, too. What did you miss as a kid? Sexual innuendo.
The penguin's too small for me.
Closeted gay characters.
I like that cape, Batman.
Freudian death traps.
Has the giant clam really swallowed Robin?
Police incompetence.
Bruce Wayne is a millionaire playboy. Hardly a secret identity for Batman.
Whether you're a kid or an adult, there's something to like about our favorite Caped Crusader. Tim and Paul dig for the deeper meanings under the Batmania every other Thursday. What's the podcast's name?
To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles.
Yeah, so about a year ago, I guess more than a year ago, I mentioned on Critiquing Comics that I had discovered the Comic Lab podcast, which is Dave Kellett and Brad Geiger, who were two of the four guys who did Webcomics Weekly way more years ago than I care to remember. And, it's a similar show. They talk about making comics and give advice and crack each other up. And it's kind of the car talk of making comics. And so, I listen to it, mainly just because they're entertaining. I'm not currently working on a comic and haven't been for some time. And, I listen to them talk about Patreon stuff, although, for a webcomic, or for a comic of any kind, it's a little bit different approach than doing Patreon for a podcast, so it doesn't help me that much usually, but it's an entertaining show. Now normally it's come out Japan time Wednesday afternoon, but a few weeks ago it didn't come out when I was expecting it. So I tweeted them and was asking about, is there no show this week? Or, and I knew that, they put their shows on Patreon, in a week maybe, or a little bit less than a week ahead of when they go out in the regular feed. So Dave wrote back, and he said they were experimenting with running it a bit later in the week, which amounts to coming out kind of Thursday early evening Japan time now.
Right.
And then he added, but Patreon backers got this week's show last Saturday, so it's already waiting for you. So, okay. Because for me, early release, getting something early, I'm too patient for that. It's not a sell for me at all. I mean, I've waited this long to watch all the Marvel movies. You know how patient I am. A few days doesn't make any difference to me. I've got plenty of other stuff to listen to in the meantime. So I was kind of like, yeah, whatever. I just said, okay, thanks. And then maybe somewhat foolishly, a few minutes later, I added that I liked it better at the previous time because several other shows that I listened to come out late Thursday, early Friday, and so I've got, nothing followed by a traffic jam.
Right.
Well, I just kind of walked right into his reply. He says, yep, that's why we make it available early on Patreon. It's a nice bonus, along with the 24 hours of exclusive shows, submitting questions, the Discord chat, etc.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. So, and also to ask a question on their show, you have to be supporting them at least $5 a month. To get a question that they read on the show and answer there. Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure that's good for like screening out the idiots, because if they just took anybody's questions on Twitter, well, like me maybe, they this way they've got them coming through Patreon, and they know that they're likely to be better questions, better quality questions. But it just feels to me like kind of everything is a little exclusive. So then on their July 4th episode, or it was what came out on July 4th in Japan, although, it's reflecting how far in advance they had recorded it, it was about Father's Day. So it came, even on Patreon, it came out somewhat after Father's Day.
Yeah.
But one of the questions on that episode was asking why the Comic Lab Twitter account links, in the profile, it links not to their website, but to their Patreon page. And Dave said, that's where the listener support directly translates into more shows being made. And I felt like, well, sure. But to me, that's sort of like pointing someone to the checkout counter before they've figured out what the product is. If someone finds the Twitter account and they've never listened to the show, well, okay, I want to find out more about the show. Click, oh, they're asking me for money.
I see.
You're going straight to the Patreon. I just found it a little off-putting. Now, and they acknowledged on the show that they don't necessarily enjoy having be in their position making their living off of their comics and to some extent the podcast. They don't really like having to shill for themselves so much, but they feel like it's necessary, and they have to make sure that people know how to support them. And so they talk about their Patreon a fair amount on the podcast, and apparently anytime you talk to them about anything related to the podcast, they mention the benefits of supporting them on Patreon. And sure, you don't want to undersell it, and I talk about Patreon on my podcasts also, but I just felt like they're pushing it a little too hard, and I don't see the point really of selling it much, outside of your podcast itself, too, because I think people want to hear it first and then know, oh, okay, I like this, so I can support it, rather than, we want you to support this, well, I don't know if I like it or not, and then maybe I won't even try it because it's a little annoying to be asked for money like that. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I can kind of see where they've taken the idea of just pushing it as hard as they can to turn a profit on the podcast. If the podcast is really doing good numbers, and their Patreon has got a lot of people coming into it for these exclusives. I can see it. It's probably a nice little bonus or a supplement to their comics work. The thing is, as someone who self promotes, you kind of have to be on all the time, and so you're not getting them as people. You're getting them as entertainers, and they're giving you all of this as a way to promote themselves and as a way to make money. Not as just giving back to the community because they really enjoy comics and talking to people and looking at comic book work. I mean, I don't know. I personally, I can't stand them. I mean,
have you listened to it?
Yeah. You turned me on to an episode where they're discussing something, and I dug the content, but I cannot stand their laughter. They laugh way too much for me, and it's just not my thing. And, I'm not trying to say that, people shouldn't laugh on a podcast. We've done that quite a bit. But something about their laughter on their podcast really grates. And I just don't need that in my life. So I followed them for a couple of episodes. But, I mean, it kind of made me tense up in the shoulders every time I heard them laugh. It was that grating to me. And I don't know why. But basically, it's not for me, but I can understand their style of promotion, and I don't think it's necessarily wrong, but it's just not genuinely them. But I mean, still, you're not going there to be their friend. You're going there to get content, and so it already is a business proposition when you approach them.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of, is it your entertainment that you're worried about, or is it their money that they're worried about? And actually, it's both. So you say, hey, where's the product? And they're like, hey, you want the product early? You can pay some money for it.
Yeah.
And so they're just cutting to the chase.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were to contact them about some other thing that was serious, heartfelt, dealt with some issue that maybe they were having, where you as a concerned listener was actually trying to do something for them, and they said, hey, by the way, Patreon, then you're dealing with an asshole. But if they haven't done that, then it's kind of fair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. It's hard for me to imagine myself, like going to the Batman conference last April and saying, I'm doing a Batman podcast, support our Patreon. I would feel like an a-hole, pushing it that hard.
But there are different ways of pushing it. And so people, you'd go to the conference and you'd push the podcast, and you'd push it really fucking hard. And then on the podcast, you would push the Patreon.
Yeah, and that's more the approach that I've taken. I just felt like they were pushing a little too hard outside of the podcast.
Well, I mean, your questions were all podcast related, and so that automatically goes to Patreon. And
right.
So, wait a minute, there's no.
But like I said, I walked right into that second one. I felt kind of stupid afterwards, but it was more kind of their approach to putting the Patreon from the Twitter. It just didn't quite make sense to me.
Well, the Patreon is the most important thing here, not the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you know them and you're on their Twitter and you like them, you see their Patreon, you see that they do a podcast. If the Patreon itself does mention the podcast and that it's free, you can go listen to it, but you get all these exclusives for the Patreon, then you'll know about the Patreon first, but the podcast second, but in quick succession. So it's actually fine. Mm-hmm. And it's a money-making venture at this point. They're not doing it out of kindness. I kind of feel that they enjoy making the podcast, but they wouldn't necessarily need to publish their conversations and their know-how for free. And there's a lot of apparatus that goes on behind making the podcast, which you know intimately. Mm-hmm. How time-consuming that can be. So, of course, they're going to get paid for it.
Or in their case, they're actually paying someone to edit it for them, which I wish I could afford to do. But although, on the other hand, I kind of like being hands-on, but it takes up a lot of time.
It does. That is always the trade-off. But, I mean, if they're putting money into it, then definitely they're above and beyond at that point. If they're doing it for free. So them pointing you to the Patreon to make sure that they're getting theirs. Great. I mean, there are some podcasts. I forget which podcast it was. I was listening to it for a while and go onto their Patreon, find out that they're making $12,000 a month. And I'm so, what the fuck is this? And they talk about the Patreon, not a whole lot, but they talk about it. And then they talk about the money and what they're going to do with the money. They never do anything with it anyway. or at least until one of them went sober. It always seemed to go to like drugs and buying new cars. It's like, okay, I kind of don't care about all of that stuff. They do have the entertainment aspect of it, and I really liked their live shows.
I think this might be one that you told me about before. I think I did listen to an episode of it. I forgot the name.
Yeah, I'm looking up the name now because it's going to fucking bug me forever.
By the way, I looked up Comic Lab's Patreon. They've hidden the dollar amount, but they have 263 patrons.
At $5 a pop?
Probably a lot of them, yeah, if they want to have all of the benefits.
Yeah. Then, yeah, that's a bit of money, but probably not as much as they would like. So yeah, the podcast that I used to listen to is called "Oh Yeah, Dude."
Oh yeah,
and a couple of years ago they were making $12,000 a month. It fluctuates, but basically the thing that I really, really enjoyed was the live show, because they go out and do these live performances, and they would talk their usual bullshit, but the audience would call them out on it sometimes. So like, hey, that's kind of cringy, that's kind of racist, that's kind of fucked up, don't do that. And they'd be called on their shit, and they would react to it. It's like, oh man, am I wrong? And so I kind of dug that interaction. They took it all and put it only a Patreon only, so no more live shows. And so suddenly I'm not interested anymore because that was the gold. Now I just get copper. I don't need that much copper in my life, so I just stopped listening. Every once in a while I'll check it out, but most of the time it's, don't even download it. I'm not going to pay money for that shit. I'm gonna keep my podcasting free, like I keep my music. Pirated or free. But anyway, I think you and I, we started in the diamond age of podcasting.
The diamond age?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Older than gold?
Well, yeah, 2005 is... there aren't many podcasts that have been around that long.
Yeah, and to that point, there are a lot of people who could not make money at podcasting, and we were kind of on that side of it. And then suddenly, podcasting became a thing. It was the new frontier for people who did radio and documentaries and all these, like, it suddenly got big, and sponsorship came hard, and NPR kind of took over everything. I mean, even NPR decided, oh, This American Life is the shit, but the TV one, let's cancel that, but the podcast, let's push that forward. And yeah, it's a bankable thing now. But if you're old school, you do it because you like the podcast, and you might have a Patreon, or specifically you do, but it's not going to be a constant promote thing. Well, even if there are things to promote it.
The thing is, I'm addicted at this point.
To podcasting?
Yes, I mean, I just, I keep saying, I'm doing deconstructing and critiquing in one feed, To the Bat Poles in another, and Machi Guy Podcast in another, and I keep saying, I'm spreading myself too thin. I should quit one of these, but I can't figure out which one I want to quit, so I just keep doing all of them.
Well, like I said when we were talking to Brendan, I know which one you should quit, and I know which one I want you to quit. They're not necessarily the same, but these are things that you created, things that you worked very hard at for many years to kind of maintain and nurture. And regardless of the profitability or listener count or any of these things, you've been constantly pushing this thing. And if there were a way that I knew to make it your day job, absolutely, I think that would be great. But I don't know, because in my mind, a podcast is something I do to just communicate with people. First and foremost, you, but also anybody who sends in a comic.
Yeah.
I'm really not interested in mainstream comics. I don't know if I've said that before, but
yeah, a few times since 2005. Yeah. Yes.
So yeah, I'm not necessarily in it for, amazing craftsmanship and budgets in superhero genres. I mean, I think comics in general would be better without superhero comics in it.
Mm-hmm. Are you? I wish that we had kind of listenership that we could do live shows. I'm not even sure where we would go to do the live show, considering that most of our audience is on a different continent. But
well, look, if every listener listening to my voice right now were to just pitch in like $100, Tim and I would fly out to wherever, like Los Angeles or someplace. No, fuck Los Angeles. I hate that place.
The ramen's terrible.
Yeah. If you're from Los Angeles, I'm sorry, but the people are fucking horrible. Quick sidebar. While I was in Los Angeles, I might have told this story a long time ago, but when I was in Los Angeles, people walk up to you all the time and ask you what your job is because they want to know if they can use you or not. And so they kind of buddy up. Hey, what do you do? And as soon as I answer comic book artist, fucking turn on their heels and walk away. It's because comic book artists don't use anybody. They don't take assistants, at least not in the American system, not really. And if I'm a producer or a director or an actor or some other Hollywood person, it means somewhere along the line, I'll need a buddy to come and do a job, and I can call them. But as a comic book artist, absolutely not. So, fuck LA people. New York, that's a city. Tim and I would fly to New York and do a show. Everybody listening, just about $100.
That would cover it, I think.
Yeah, that would cover it. I could even buy lunch before the show.
Okay, so that's the challenge to you, our listeners.
as if.
We might get 100 from somebody, probably my brother.
Oh, bless your brother. He's an awesome guy.
Yes. Okay, well, so some more self-promotion here. And promotion for our podcast and how you can submit to it. If you want us to talk about your comic, send a PDF or a link to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and we'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. Of course, Mulele and I, on our Patreon, are doing the podcast Tim Catches Up with the MCU, where we're talking about Marvel movies. We haven't recorded one in a little while. Iron Man 3 is the last one that went up. We need to get to Thor the Dark World. Yeah, so we can talk about our scheduling off podcast, but that's the one that's coming up next. So
yeah, it's like tearing off a Band-Aid just to discover there's another Band-Aid underneath. Man, Iron Man 3 and Thor the Dark World, they're like the two lowest ranked movies in the cinematic universe. And so I was kind of hoping to kind of get it all done quickly. But now we got to go back to the Band-Aid.
Oh, well. But then after that's Winter Soldier, right?
Yeah. That's some good shit.
Okay.
And finally, you will know why I'm so angry at Captain Marvel.
Okay. Okay, so till next time, this is Tim.
I'm Mulele.
And thanks for listening to Critiquing Comics. Follow us on Twitter. I'm at Decon Comics. Mulele is at Mulele Redux. Next week on Deconstructing Comics, Mike Barr, famous for writing such titles as Batman and the Outsiders and Camelot 3000, gave a keynote presentation at the Bowling Green State University Batman Conference in April. And with his permission, we'll present my full recording of his talk for your enjoyment. That's next week right here in this feed. See you then.
Oh, wait a minute, man.
What?
Before we end. Oh, never mind. Sorry. What am I thinking? Never mind. Until next time. This is Mulele.
Okay, and Tim. And thanks for listening to Critiquing Comics.
Right. I guess 2 takes then.
Okay.